Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another episode. Finally, the first one in a long time. I have to apologize for all my subscribers that I haven't made a video in a little while, but it was a little bit of an impromptu break because we decided to get some work done around the apartment and my workroom here with all my games and, basically where I shoot this and edit it and everything. This room basically had to be sacrificed for storage and stuff like that. So we're almost done. Not quite there yet. There's still a whole bunch of stuff over on that side of the room. But we're getting there, slowly but surely, but I'm super glad to be back. I have just enough room to work with to start shooting again, so I'm really happy. So the game that we're going to be talking about today is Rambo First Blood Part 2 for the Sega Master System. I used to love this game when I was a kid mainly because when I grew up, obviously I didn't have the Nintendo Entertainment System. My parents got me the Sega Master System, which I previously talked about. And I was really jealous of a lot of the games that they had. One of them being Commando and like Ikari Warriors. I think that's how you pronounce it. I loved Ikari Warriors in the arcade. And when it came to the Nintendo Entertainment System, it obviously wasn't exactly the same, but it was still pretty cool. And I loved games like that back then. I really wanted one. The Sega Master System didn't appear to have one, however, until I found this game. So this is sort of the Sega Master System version of Commando, and it's actually a pretty damn good game in its own right. So we're going to go check it out right now. So here's another Sega game that has a bunch of different versions depending on what territory that you buy it in. So here in the United States, obviously we know it as Rambo First Blood Part 2. But if you were to get this game in Europe, you would know it as Secret Command. And if you were to buy this game in Japan, you probably know it as Ashura. Now, the big difference with Ashura is that it was released on the Sega Mark III as opposed to the Sega Master System here in the United States and Europe. So why did this happen? Well, obviously this was a marketing decision by Sega of America to take advantage of the popularity of Rambo, which was pretty big at the time. So they bought the license and ported a game that already existed over. So they had this, pretty good game that they were able to tweak just a little bit for American audiences. And here you go. So back to the game. So when you actually turn the system on, you're greeted with this title screen, which is actually a pretty good approximation of the original Rambo movie poster. But as you can also see here, there's no options or anything like that to adjust. So really all there is you're just going to start the game. And if you let the menu system sit there long enough, there is an attract mode. And the attract mode will actually show you the two-player option, which I didn't capture game footage with another person with me, so I only have the one player. But here at the attract mode, it shows that there is a two-player option, which I might add is something that Commando never did have. The gameplay is pretty simple. As you can see, you're just kind of running around shooting all the bad guys that come on the screen, and your character can move in all 8 directions. However, he can't shoot behind you at all, so he can only shoot to the sides and up to the front. Now, another thing you're probably noticing is that the characters move painfully slow, and I can definitely see how that would be a huge turnoff for some people who really like, kind of twitchy gameplay. This game doesn't have really twitchy gameplay. It's kind of weird. You have to actually be a little bit more strategic with where you put yourself on the field. But since your characters move so slow, I highly recommend playing this game with a Genesis controller, because a Genesis controller will work on a Sega Master System, and they have a much better D-pad. So definitely, pro tip here, use the Genesis pad. Now, as you make your way through the levels, there aren't really any bosses or mini-bosses or anything, but there are, occasional, like, armored vehicles that you'll have to take out with a couple, grenade shots. And then at the end, there's always this sort of, like, fortress that you have to, fight off a whole bunch of soldiers and then shoot one explosive arrow to open up the, the entrance at the end. One of the cool things that I had completely forgotten about this game is that there is sort of like a weapon upgrade system. It's not detailed, it's not complex at all. But there is something there to add a little bit of a depth to this game. So as you make your way through the game, you kill a certain amount of enemies and they drop these power-ups. And for the machine gun, it's either an L or an S. The L lets you shoot across the entire screen, and the S lets you actually shoot through enemies, so you can take out more than one guy with a single bullet. And the explosive arrow upgrades are cool because they eventually let you carry more, and then the explosion carries like a debris field with it. There's 6 levels to this game, and each level definitely provides its own challenge. However, a couple of them will definitely look a little familiar because they basically just recycled earlier levels and recolored them or reskinned them, however you want to put it. But by far, my favorite board in the entire game is when you're basically being attacked by a whole bunch of Rick Grimes. Now, there aren't really any true codes for this game, any like cheat codes. There is sort of a continue system, so to speak. So as you play through the game, you actually have to get to, you know, level 2, level 3, level 4, whatever level you're going to get to. And then there's a code to take you back to that level as long as you don't hit reset. I would have absolutely loved to see like a God mode code, or a code that made you move faster, or a code where you had like a knife and you could just shank people. So graphically speaking, I'd say this game is, you know, it's okay. There's a lot better looking 8-bit games out there. And the graphics are pretty basic. They don't try to do anything too fancy. And, you know, like I said, a couple of the levels repeat themselves, so they just sort of recolor and reskin them. And the game is pretty colorful. But yeah, overall, it's just sort of like an average looking game. It's really nothing to write home about. Overall, sound-wise, I would say this game is actually probably a little bit below average. The music isn't very good. It's not bad, but, you know, when they try to do the Rambo theme song on the title screen, it's just not a very good approximation. And then the sound effects are just very bare bones. You know, the gunshots and the explosions, they're just not, they don't have a whole lot of punch. There's just not much there going on. And it also doesn't capture everything that's going on the screen. Just take a listen here. Overall, I would say the sound isn't that great. However, it's certainly not like offensively bad. How's that for glowing praise? So how well does this game relate to Rambo First Blood Part 2, the film? Well, the answer is not well. The enemies, the bad guys, the levels and all that stuff, they don't really make sense compared to the actual film. And if anything, I would say this would be First Blood Part 1, the game, simply because of the fact that one level in there where you're basically going through a town with a whole bunch of cops chasing you, which was kind of the plot of the first one. And then at the very end of the game, that last level with the thing, it gets a little weird. Alright, so there you have Rambo for the Sega Master System. Another bizarre 80s licensing thing where they're taking R-rated properties and licensing them for video games when video games were skewed a lot younger. I think back then, at least that's how they were being targeted. Obviously nowadays you still have like R-rated licensees being used in video games, but they tend to be a little bit more targeted towards an older audience. But back then, I mean, that's an R-rated property, and that was geared towards me, and I was like 10 years old, so kind of bizarre, but I love it. It was a great time to grow up. But yeah, all in all, definitely a solid game. If you have a Sega Master System, you kind of have to have it in your collection just to cover that genre, along with the Ninja, because that was sort of like the equivalent to Gunsmoke on the NES. But yeah, all in all, pretty solid game. Until next time, guys.